On this channel, I talk about weapons used in Warhammer 40k that are as old as the 1800s, and even after thousands of years of tech advancement, these weapons are still utilized in war relatively unchanged and are still effective. But there's gotta be at least one category of weapons that have well and truly died off from use in the Imperial Guard. And you're right. That would be the submachine gun. So today, we'll be talking about the brief history of submachine guns, why they've been effectively phased out in our world, why they mostly wouldn't survive in 40k, and look at a couple weapons in Darktide that you would consider to be submachine guns, but are actually something a little different. Now, submachine guns came about because soldiers needed a weapon that was capable of rapid fire like the Maxim or late Gatling guns, but could be carried by individual soldiers and not need an entire crew, especially for trench warfare where you could jump into a trench with a dozen guys and a bolt action just won't cut it, which is exactly why we started seeing submachine guns in World War I, but they wouldn't hit their stride until World War II. Here's where we see the pros of submachine guns with examples like the M3 Grease gun, the Sten gun, the Owen gun, and the Papashaw 43. We essentially have magazine-fed pipes with stocks attached. Crude, yes, but capable of spitting lead in a time where many soldiers still used bolt actions. Sure, past 50 yards, you're not as effective, but in close quarters, this was a game changer. However, in only a couple decades, this will change. By late World War II, the STG-44 would be created and begin the introduction of assault rifles. But it wouldn't be until Vietnam that we see them become mainstream, and now we need to see where submachine guns fit into this. This is where we see three categories come up: submachine guns, machine pistols, and personal defense weapons. For the moment, consider these categories as roles, and that a specific weapon could fulfill different roles. I also need to explain the requirement for the roles. First, we have submachine guns. These are full auto weapons firing pistol rounds that require two hands to operate proficiently, as most submachine guns weigh 6 to 8 pounds. These got regulated room clearing, CQB, and were used by special forces. The small size making maneuvering easier, and the pistol rounds made using suppressors more viable. Next, we have machine pistols. These are simply pistols that can be fitted with large magazines that can fire full auto. They were made to be operated with one hand in mind, like a K9 handler or security with VIP. You have one hand for a weapon that can spit bullets while having the other to wrangle your dog or boss. It's also easier to conceal carry because, well, it's a pistol. The limiting factor really is how big of a magazine you want. Lastly, we have the personal defense weapon. This one gets a little weird. Essentially, it can be the size of a submachine gun, but instead of firing a high caliber low velocity bullet, you're firing a small caliber high velocity bullet. Examples being the 5.7, 4.6, and if we want to get real technical, the 30 carbine. The necessity was to give troops in the rear echelon a means to defend themselves, but with a weapon that was smaller than a standard infantry rifle. Think tankers, artillerymen, and truck drivers. Now, originally, submachine guns fulfilled this role, but with body armor becoming more commonplace in armies of major nations, the need for the high velocity rounds is what kicked submachine guns out of this role. The rise of body armor is where we really start to see the beginning of the end for the submachine gun, as even soft body armor is sufficient at stopping pistol rounds, let alone steel and ceramic armor, which is capable of stopping rifle rounds. And as body armor has become more widely available and effective, it's more and more likely a submachine gun can't be seen as a first choice. The next issue is the carbine. Rifles were typically 40 inches long, which was considered unwieldy to the 30 inches a submachine gun was. But with new iterations of assault rifles like the M4, where collapsible stock and a barrel shortened to 14 inches instead of 20, reducing the overall length to 30 inches, meant it was comparable to a submachine gun in length while still firing the 5.56 caliber, capable of defeating soft body armor unlike the 9mm of a submachine gun. These carbines have only gotten smaller, where some rifles with the stock folded come in at 25 inches. Now you see submachine guns regulated to law enforcement and counterterrorism, where the combatants they expect to face are not as likely to have armor. Machine pistols have pretty much been left untouched, as their niche hasn't really changed and they aren't really expected to fight armored opponents, at least not on their own. Case in point, where you would see Secret Service, you'll typically see local and state law enforcement nearby with long guns. All of this to say, do submachine guns have a place in 40k? The answer is they can, but one, you'll never hear it referred to as a submachine gun, and two, there's only one place where it would be appropriate for a true submachine gun, as a weapon for gangs and hives. I mentioned earlier how simple submachine guns are, but I don't think I truly got the point across. These are so simple that you don't even need a trigger. You could just load a magazine, pull the bolt back and just let that gun chatter until it runs out of ammo. That's because the trigger holds the bolt back like this hobby holds you back from a savings account. Meanwhile, in Britain, a guy named Louis designed a submachine gun that, when put together, the spec works. Louis wasn't a gun designer, just a dude that wasn't a big fan of the government that decided his hobby would be turning sheet metal and pipes from a hardware store and what I can only describe as a British ghetto blaster. And while that gun was pretty garbage, if you were a gang member shooting at someone across the room or doing a ye old drive-by, it works. Which is why in a hive city, a submachine gun would work. You aren't fighting Space Marines, Xenos, or even Imperial Guard, just poor people and other gang members. Because just like in our world, a submachine gun here would fail against basic body armor. But what if you're stubborn? Let me know in the comments what SMG you would use in 40k given the choice. It's clear the Imperial Guard doesn't use a submachine gun. They do, however, use machine pistols and personal defense weapons, and we see examples of these in Darktide. First, the IUS Mark III Shredder Auto Pistol. Auto pistol being the 40k term for machine pistol. Now, while we do and should use both hands when handling this, you can one-hand this if necessary. And as a matter of fact, the 8th Cadian Regiment uses auto pistols as sidearms, which is a lifesaver considering your las gun runs dry and a gun is in your face. A pistol shooting 16 rounds in a second, making that gun's face resemble a bucket of smashed crabs. Pretty handy, because while machine pistols can be hard to control and don't have much of an effective range, when you're practically barrel stuffing whatever the work feels like staying your way, the accuracy is good enough. As a side note, the Shredder is a blast to use. As a psyker, but especially as a veteran, where the ammo consumption is less punishing. Let's move on to instances of personal defense weapons, and we kinda sorta got a couple with this one. The Gray Mark IV and the Vrax Mark V auto carbines. And like I mentioned earlier, these are rifles that are the size of submachine guns, but shooting rifle rounds. That does bring up a point. If you cut down the length of a barrel on a rifle, does it affect the distance the rifle can fire and its lethality? The answer is yes, but the numbers are negligible, considering you need a PDW to go at most 200 yards, and the rifle performs very well within that range. Not to mention, the makeup of the ammunition is a major factor, as some rounds will have a higher velocity than others, which can also help make up for the shorter barrel. Also to note, one of the few benefits to auto weapons is they are a counter to aliens that are resistant to energy weapons like las guns, such as the Loxatl, which are pretty much sentient Komodo dragons with guns around their necks. And to be real, if you're a PDF soldier on a poor world, while it's not a las gun, this will do well enough to defend against rebellions and cultists alike. Throw in some armor piercing rounds or hollow point rounds, because bringing additional pain and suffering to your enemies is really a bonus, and you can even take on some low-level Xenos, though I wouldn't press my luck. Let's also take a moment to appreciate that they try to justify the gun's high ammo count by having triple stack magazines, which this is a concept we use as well, it's just not all that reliable and it's prone to jamming. All in all, while I like SMGs, their limitations just don't really make them worth it. Not in our world, and definitely not in 40k if you're a guardsman trying to survive. I hope you enjoyed learning about them all the same. It was weird theorizing why something doesn't exist when I normally do the opposite, but it was a question that came to mind, and curiosity turns into research, which is how we get here. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Leave a like and sub as always. Let me know if you got an idea for a video, and I'll see you next time out in the warp.